think if you're ready, Sharon, we'll go ahead and get started. Now, I'll start us off by welcoming everyone. Welcome to our December installment of our Creating Vital Congregations webinar series here at LTS. Today, we are pleased and lucky to have Reverend Dr. Sharon Ellis Davis, who's going to be presenting a seminar on intimate partner violence in the church, a faithful and faith-filled response. Reverend Dr. Ellis Davis is a visiting assistant professor here at LTS, so we are lucky to have her in our midst on a more regular basis. But we are also very grateful to have her leading us today in an area in which she has tremendous experience and expertise, which there are actually many areas in which she has that. She's a United Church of Christ ordained pastor with deep roots in the Pentecostal church, and she brings over 30 years of pastoral care experience in the church, as well as in the academy in the fields of ministry, pastoral care, theology, and ethics. So Sharon earned her Master of Divinity degree from Chicago Theological Seminary, and she has 2 doctorates. One wasn't enough. Two deep roots of education. So she has her Doctor of Ministry and Pastoral Care from McCormick Theological Seminary, and she has her PhD from Chicago Theological Seminary in the field of theology, ethics, and sociology. She's the author of 2 books and numerous book chapters. She's the author of Battered African American Women, Study in Gender Entrapment, and the recently published Navigating My Way Through Sexual and Domestic Violence. Actually, I think I have an old title there, but hopefully you'll share with us the title that came out with the 2022 book with Cascade recently. And I'll put a link to both of those in the chat. There's more. I'm not done introducing yet. She is also a retired certified chaplain in the Association of Pastoral Chaplains. She teaches classes such as sexual and domestic violence, pastoral care in times of crisis, Christian ethics, and peace building in the beloved community. She's also married to Reverend Dr. Edward Smith Davis, who's conference minister for the Southern Conference of the United Church of Christ. Together they share 6 children, one who has passed, 15 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. And her favorite scriptural passage is Isaiah 40:31. But they waited upon the Lord, but they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. So we are grateful today to have such a witness, such a teacher, such a scholar, such a pastor with us who has such deep wells of experience, who's done so much to combine the academic and the pastoral, the prophetic and the pastoral. And we hope that in this space today, we can be lifted up and be given strength and wisdom to think about how the church can respond to such a pressing issue. So I hand the floor over to you, Dr. Ellis Davis. Thank you so much. I think you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, I thought everybody could read lips, so that's my mistake. I said thank you, Dr. Dickinson, and everybody for joining. I hope more can join as we have conversations. But I am pleased and excited to be here. I'm excited about the invitation, and it gives me another opportunity to talk about a subject that's so near and dear to my heart. I'm teaching a class in next year, sometime early next year, on what your soul work, what soul work is, and what it means to dig deep in your heart and your soul to know what work that God put you on this planet to do. And I know that mine is deeply around justice, but that justice is generally demonstrated through the work I do in sexual and domestic violence. I want to know, as many of you probably do know, that subject is wide and deep, and we're here for an hour and a half, from 1:30 to 3. Dr. Dickinson, if I'm wrong, let me know. And so I want to go over so that when you leave here, you'll have a basic understanding of the of domestic violence, and that you would have a basic understanding of trauma and the faith response. But certainly we cannot do it all, and I would not try to do it all. You would hang up and just disconnect yourself. But I hope when you leave here, you'll have a sense of what it means to be a survivor victim of intimate partner violence. And so we're going to get started. What I'm asking you to do is stay alert, because I don't like to talk by myself. I can talk by myself, but I don't like to. I want to for us to have conversations along the way. I certainly have to do my part of lecturing, but I have pop-up things to ask you during that time, and I hope that you chime in, even if you cannot see me. And then we'll have times when we come back and forth to talk without the PowerPoint and go back to it. And so there are a lot of phases, and the idea is to have you communicate along the way, but finish in a timely amount of time so that we can have some dialogue and some questions that specifically are on your mind. And so that's the plan for today, and let's see how it goes. And we just ask God's presence to be with us, and to be with us and comfort us and strengthen us. And if there are any kinds of flashbacks, that God give you the strength to move on in the PowerPoint. But if not, just continue to take care of yourself. And if you need to walk away, we certainly understand. Thank you so much. So I'm going to share my screen. It's still there. So far, so good. And let me see what happens now when I say share. Oh, that's not what I wanted. So I go out of that again. Let me see where we are here. I think I have to double click it if I'm not mistaken. I probably just put my. This is just strange, because what's coming on is not what I want to come on and not what I'm hitting.
Okay, I can see the PowerPoint now.
Do you see it?
Yeah, the PowerPoint's up.
Okay, I brought it up a different way, but if you can see it, I'm happy.
Yeah, it's good.
And you can still see it.
Yep. Yeah, we
Yes.
still see.
It's doing some of its own thing, but it's certainly there. And so this is just the title of we're doing that I talked about a little bit before we came in here. And so we can just dig right into the topic. Does anyone here have a definition that they'd like to offer just in the top of their head to what, and we'll call it intimate partner violence, but it's the same as domestic violence, as to how would you define intimate partner violence or domestic violence, whichever term you use? In your own words, it doesn't have to be a sophisticated answer, just what do you think it is? And you can just start talking when you think you want to say something. If not, we'll just.
It's when people live together and one hurts in a physical way usually, but it could be emotionally too, the other or others.
Absolutely, thank you. And so when we look at the term, the definition that's most common, and it had all those kinds of things you were talking about, is a pattern of assaultive and coercive behaviors that adults or adolescents use against their intimate partners. And so, of course, it can be an intimate partner. It can be a same gender loving partner. It could be a someone that's in a long-term relationship or in a relationship. It could be a man and woman spouse or a dating relationship. It could be a teen dating relationship. So as long as there's a pattern of relationships that goes into if it fits in those areas that we're talking about, then that is a intimate partner violence. Now we do have family violence, and we're not covering that, and that's violence within families. And we have a domestic violence court in the city of Chicago where I was reared, specifically to deal with all of these kinds of all these kind of cases. When we talk about physical, with, that one is easy, hitting, but there's some other things that can go into hitting also. It could be hurting pets. It could be punching a wall. It can be anything that physical can be anything that can be assigned to you or someone else that violence could take place. And so punching holes in the wall could be considered physical, even though, I have to say that there are people that just do that anyway. But in an intimate partner relationship, it could really indicate this is going to happen to you also. It could be slapping, it could be use of weapons, attacks against your property and your pets. And so just know that it has a wide range. And then there's sexual violence. And sexual violence comes in two flavors. The way that we're talking about it today, and we will talk about it a little bit deeper when we get to talking about consent. But the important part is to understand about this piece where we're talking about intimate partner violence, that sexual violence happens in relationships also in a different way than like a complete stranger or being raped or assaulted in different kind of ways. It happens in sexual relationships. And in marital, in intimate partner relationships. And so in the marital acts that we may get to, one of the things is just having, scriptures that people use around having conjugal rights, or someone is saying no to them. And when we talk about consents, you'll see that more. Someone is saying no, and then you're forcing them to have sex. That's a crime. And so we have to distinguish between how that happens in relationships. And so I always want to keep it there so that we know that. And then psychological violence, you're talking about emotional violence. You're talking about playing mind games. You're talking about, just simple things like your spouse saying to you, and I may use he as the perpetrator, and I may use she as the victim survivor, but understand, that the violence happens in all relationships. The stats just kind of add up toward women as survivor victims, and the stats that I'll read to you later kind of show that also. And so, one of the ways that a mentor of mine put it is that both men and women, have breast cancer, but the way that it impacts women is why you see the woman's face up there, but there certainly are a lot of men that experience breast cancer. So think about it that way, because somebody always asks me, and even when I say yes, it happens to both, it happens in all kind of ways. But right now, my focus is on the women part of the conversation for sake of time, and we don't have a chance to go into a lot of that conversation. So if you would bear with me on that. Things like, I don't like the way your food tastes. It could be that simple. Or why are you wearing X, Y, and Z? It could be just constantly, as we talk about a pattern of making you feel insecure, making you feel that you're not worthy, making you feel like there's something that you're doing that's wrong when the other one is doing wrong. That's called gaslighting, but that's part of the psychological and emotional impact also. So a lot of things fall in that category. We know physical, but sometimes we don't think of those other things. When my mother came with me to my home church in Chicago to start a domestic violence ministry there in the church setting, which I thought was so important. She said when we was going over these kind of things, she's like, it's something to make you go, And so it's also a time when we talk about this to kind of interrogate yourself and do reflection and see how might you have been, even stepping down that road yourself. And so there's a lot of self-awareness involved in this conversation. There's a lot of ahas involved in these conversations. And there's a lot of introspection going on in these conversations. Economic, there have been cases where the men hold back the money or they prostitute the woman, and make them go out and make money for hire, and then come home and provide, give them physical harm because they went out and did that. And so they could have control of all the money and her money, taking her check. And so economics is really important to think about when you're thinking about whether someone is a survivor. And we're talking about intimate partner violence, but especially when it's a senior. we have to be aware of those kinds of things going on. And it's all about power and control. And so what I'm going to do is show you the power and control wheel. It's probably not anything that you can read. And it's a blessing that these PowerPoints are really showing up, because they kind of disappeared on me a few times as I was preparing it. I'm like, Lord, keep these PowerPoints up here. And so far, so good. And so you can see the kinds of, the whole center of this wheel is power and control. And that's kind of what you need to have your brain wrapped around, that it's about power and control. If you see it happening in society, in ways that people are trying to control, if you see it happening in our political life, if you see it happening in our churches, that's all about power and control, trying to get someone to do what you want them to do. And you do it, by any means necessary. And this shows it. I'll do some of it. We talked about economical abuse, sexual abuse, using children. Using children as kind of a threat to take the children away from you is power and control. There's threats to out people who are gay and lesbian and trans, and so they'll keep silent because there are cultural issues where we don't tell our business in the street, and so when all of those happen, a person can tell you that you're all alone. Nobody's going to want you after 5 children, and all of these kinds of things that people that are involved in abusive behavior do. One common one is isolation. The whole idea is to get you to think and believe that nobody is on your side. Nobody wants to hear, what you have to say, because they're sick of you, and all of this is your fault anyway. The blaming and the shaming. And so power and control is used to help that happen. And so keep that in mind, because we'll talk about that again in a few minutes. And so this is important to understand. I think I can go through that quickly. I have to move the pictures around so I can see everything, but maybe we'll be able to do that. Yeah, I can move them around. So domestic violence is a learned behavior. And how do we learn it? And if you want to chime in, this time you can chime in and talk with me. But domestic violence is a learned behavior. Is it Lerner? I can't think of her name right now. Started it years ago, and that we learn how to be violent. We learn, how to we didn't wake up and we weren't born, with domestic violence on our mind. It's something that we learn to do, and that's good news, because if you learn something, it can be unlearned. And so the whole idea is to help us to unlearn those patterns that we learned in life in order to have what? Power and control. And so I think her name is Lorraine Lerner. But what do we do today with that? How are we learning it today? Through social media, through videos that are extremely violent that we watch and children watch, and there's no real restrictions on what you're watching. Television, media is a good example of things that are happening in politics. Could happen because we learn to act a certain way based on who's influencing us. And so that behavior, if it's learned and you're impacted by that, by such as trauma that we'll talk about in a few, then that also can be helped in ways that we can claim healing, but maybe not in the same way that we started off thinking that healing would look and feel like. It is not caused by genetics. There was a time, and please interrupt me if you want to say something on the topics I'm talking about. Please do, because now I can't really see you, or at least all of you. It's not caused by genetics. There was a time, and you can put. I meant to put mental illness on that block, but there was a time when scientists thought that it was our genetic makeup. There was something that we inherited. There were, that something causes this, in the physical sense, that leads us to domestic violence behavior. And one of those was mental illness. And mental illness, we talk about that a lot now, that people have mental illness in some form. We talk about depression and all the things that people are suffering, but mental illness does not cause domestic violence. It may help to escalate it as alcohol and anger. But when you talk about this, that it is not the cause of domestic violence, but it may enhance it. The cause of domestic violence is power and control. And so mental illness, I could say that we can blame a whole lot of things on mental illness, but when it comes to the actions of perpetrators, you can see that it's not about the mental illness, and they may have some. I did a study one time and got an A and talked about mental illness a little bit, and they says, yeah, a little mental illness is there, a little pathology is there, but the illness is something that people decide. They make a decision on domestic violence of what they're going to do. It's a decision. Alcohol might enhance it, but it's not the cause. Anger, especially anger that's blamed on you, as we talk about behavior of the victim. Anger is real, but as we used to say in the streets when I was a police officer, you don't do that when the popo come. And so that anger is selective. And if anybody don't know what the popo is, that's the police. That anger is something that you have, but it doesn't cause the violence, because you can control that anger when you want to, but you put it on certain people, and then you go and blame them for what it is that you did to them to make them do that. Stress. We're going to talk about some systemic issues lately, and that challenges the power and control will, but it's always still important to keep in mind that stress, and there's a lot of it in African American communities and other communities of color that have undergone oppression. But again, it's not the cause of domestic violence. I was just under stress. No, you chose to do what you did. And that's important for us to know, especially as caregivers, that goes on. And the behavior of the victim, I had one story where one woman, husband had beat her in the bathroom. And then he went out and got some ice cream and came back and sat on the commode top and started explaining to her how all this was her fault in the first place. And so the behavior of the victim is something that we do in our lives also, especially when it comes to rape. We ask those questions. What was she wearing? Why did she go to the hotel in the first place? Well, she's shaking her little butt all around. We find ways as individuals, and we find ways as oppressors. We find ways as legislators, that it's their fault for being poor. And so that behavior of the victim is not an abnormal excuse, but it's not an excuse for domestic violence. There's nothing that you have done that should make someone commit domestic violence acts on you. And we cannot tell them. One of the first things that we do when a victim shows up is ask, what did you do? When a victim of rape, what did you do? And so we have to watch that kind of behavior. And if you're having questions as I'm moving through these slides, please write them down and put them in the chat so that you won't lose your thought, and we will get to them. But still feel free. I'll pause if anybody want to say anything now.
I'm sorry, I was late. I caught the end of what you were saying about their actions are controllable.
I'm saying that domestic violence is an act of controlling.
Of control. Okay.
You'll see it if you want the PowerPoint. I'll send it to you. But you'll see the power and control will.
Okay.
And at the center of that, it says power and control, and then all the tactics, that abusers would use to control you. And so now we're talking about what is not caused by also. And these are the things that are showing up that are not, they may have actions they may lead to, but they certainly are not the cause. The cause is because someone made a choice in their behavior to treat you that way.
Okay,
and
thank you.
Power and control. Is that helpful?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Sure.
I found your comment about anger to be very, very helpful, because my experience has been when there's domestic violence, they immediately send people for anger management classes. It's like we've completely missed the point that it's about power and control, and it's a choice. It's not just about controlling controlling anger. So thank you for highlighting that amongst all of the other things as well.
You're absolutely right. We make choices, don't we? You know, we make choices, and there may be some influencing factors, as we'll talk about later on, but still we make choices. And part of that, you know, well, I won't get into that now, but yes, you're right. And thanks for emphasizing that. I'll move on. And so safety issues, all of these that you're seeing are reasons, are some reasons, as we'll talk about in a few, about why people don't leave. But separation violence can happen. Suicide, homicide, victim perpetrator. What that means is there have been perpetrators who, when you're threatening to leave them, that will say, well, I'm going to commit suicide. And then there are some that say that I'll kill you if you leave me. And so those are safety issues to think about when you're talking to a person that is a victim, especially, but victim survivor, you know, in general, about these are safety issues. Child welfare and custody. One of the issues is, you know, is that you could, a woman can lose her children for not being able to protect them, for not being able to keep them safe. And those are things when we talk about, it won't come up again, but when we talk about different issues that changes the power and control dynamics, this is one of them that you have to think about when you're asking, why don't she leave? There are others we'll talk about also, but these are here. Abuse during pregnancy escalates. Immigration threats, you know, they can be threatening the fact that whether I'm going to, you know, we said this earlier, I'm going to out you as being gay. It's going to mess up your relationship with your family. I'm going to turn you into the immigration authorities. And those are issues that are safety also, because the power and control is still going on, but it can also cause harm to the victim, not only by the perpetrator, but by organizations and institutions. And that conversation will come a little later. And so this continues when we talk about barriers to leaving. You know, there are many barriers of leaving, and you can probably come up with a list of your own. But danger and fear. I mean, it's just I'm afraid. You know, I've already been emotionally abused, and that usually happens before the physical abuse starts. You know, many times it's a precursor to physical. But I've already been set up with a low sense of self-worth, self-esteem. I believe you're going to kill me. I believe you know who I am, because every time I go somewhere, you pop up. You know, and so you have this paranoia around what's going to happen to me if I leave, and is he going to follow me? Does he know what I'm doing? You know, so it's all of those that danger and fear that keeps you kind of, you know, as we talk about in trauma, you know, the fight or flight. You know, you're either going to or freeze. You know, and so most of the time it's a freezing because people are afraid to leave. The societal pressure that's out there, you know, I often talk about music, you know, in this field, and I can go on and on because I love music, you know, but kind of what we hear in the music category, whether it's the church or whether it's secular music. You know, one of my favorite is that, you know, what you won't do for love. You try everything, but you don't give up, you know, and so that's what I tell people that women hear. So the pressure is on women to fix it. The pressure is on women to make it right, to figure out what they've been doing wrong, you know, so that this won't happen anymore, and stay there. Culturally, they want you to stay there because they don't want all of their business in the street. So you can get a lot of societal pressure, while, you know, and we can just keep naming them all day long, but societal pressure is important, and you can write that down if you have a question about it later. Religious values, just what we've learned in our traditions, our religious traditions. I'm United Church of Christ, coming from a strong Pentecostal background, but being United Church of Christ, which is a much liberal church, doesn't stop me from having deeper religious values. It doesn't stop me from sometimes wanting to not act a certain way in terms of feeling like I have permission to leave when I really haven't had it. It's strong enough in my religious faith, and so those things are still there. Again, family discouragement. There's sometimes collusion. even between the parent of the victim and the family member's parents or siblings. They go on their side and they discourage you to leave for whatever reason that they continue to give you. And there are many. Economics, we talked a little bit about that. Survival, so I'll go there. Nowhere to go. Remember isolation. Isolation is, who are you going to go to? Because they've already said nobody wants you, and they have already threatened you their well-being if you go there for help. Then we have children that we want the fathers to raise the children. We want them to be in relationship with the children, and so we stay there for the children, and we stay there so that they can actually also be safe. The emotional investment, you've heard that I gave this person 50 years of my life, and you think I'm going to let them go now to somebody else to be the better spouse when I put all of this investment into him, her, and I'm not going to leave this relationship. And then the isolation, we've talked about that enough already. Any comment? If you're talking, remember to take yourself off pause.
Just, I don't know if this came up already. I'm sorry if it did, but just to lift up a comment in the chat, Greg Hill noted that there was a study in New Zealand that it cost $70,000 to leave someone.
Wow, that's an interesting study. I've seen studies like that, and I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised at all. And that's part of the economic, right? It's part of the economics of affordability, of being able to feel some sense of comfort in the living conditions that you have acquired. And so economics can play a really big piece. We'll come back to it on some other topics. And so bystanders, and if we talk about bystanders, I don't see the complete topic, but I know it's power and control tactics by the bystanders. That we have ways in which we in the community use power and control. And I think that's what's important for our self-examination, our way of thinking about how we act with victims of domestic violence when they really need to hear something empowering, the things that we may do. Just like abusers, we can minimize, deny, and blaming. And the term bystanders, I'm a trainer with Faith Trust Institute in Seattle, Washington, with churches and congregations and institutions. Things since COVID has been quite quieted down for people participating like that anymore. But bystanders, is a term that we use from the text about this the woman that was on the side of the road, and the people that came by and didn't do anything. Those were the bystanders. People that minimize, deny, and blame the severity of what you're going through. Those are the bystanders. They see you, but are they going to do anything about it? Are they going to try to intercede in any kind of way and help? And then you get pressuring the victim to try and stay harder. That's that song I just gave you, what you won't do for love. You try everything, but you don't give up. When the men are thinking about other songs like there must be 50 ways to leave your lover. Oh, jump on the bus, Gus, make a new plan, Stan. You don't need to be corduroy, just set yourself free. Oh, hop on the bus, you don't need to discuss much. Just drop out the keys and set yourself free. And women are singing, what you won't do for love. You try everything, but you don't give up. And that's what women hear. Women hear because somehow it is, as I said earlier, our job to fix it. Try harder, keep working at it. Colluding with the batterer, we talked about that from the last, so we won't go in that. That's when I talked about people that are in your own family that will still collude with the battery. There are systems that collude with the batterer. And so there are so many things there are tactics that we use that are the same that we talk about in battering situations so we have the option to change our behavior in that too. Not providing sufficient resources. That one thing that batterers, that victims need are resources. It can be brought up later, but I can say it now, while my mind is on it. Even something as simple in the church as providing gas so that they can get from one place to another, or the tire on the car needs fixing, and that's why I can't, leave. there are things that we can do in the church with our benevolence and with funds that we have that can, it's the little things that can stop us from making decisions to leave, but not having the resources is something, a place where the church can really, as we're talking about the faith community, come in handy with the things that small things that they can help them with. And then misusing religion to justify abuse, that we will get to religion later, but it's been misused. It's been misused by us individually. It's been misused in the church. It's been preached in different ways to blame or justify the abuse. And so all of that is power and control tactics. They may not know they're using power and control tactics, but there are tactics to make you feel guilty, to make you feel shame, to make the batterer empowered. And so we have to watch for those things also. I'll quiet for a few seconds if someone want to chime in. Okay. So I need your voices here. This is about consent, and that's the video that I want to share you. But before, and this is regarding sexual violence in general, because we're not going to be talking about today sex in relationships, yes, but not sexual violence in general. So one of the things that I wanted to stress in these series is that one of the issues is in our society is that we don't understand what consent is. Can someone give a couple of someone's tell me how they would define consent?
Consent is approval, right?
Giving approval.
It's giving approval.
It can be that simple. Giving someone approval. Yes means yes, right? And no means no. And so when we talked about earlier about conjugal rights, we talked about that scripture. I have a right to you. No, it really talks about there's mutual rights. And it certainly wasn't something intended. Another term we use in our conversations with people, what God intends. We make those assertions that I'm surely God didn't intend for those rights that were given that were mutual to be some reason why someone can rape them or take something from them. And so that's what I wanted to share, but I'm going to come off here now. I'm going to change the then I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to stop sharing, and then I'm going to go back in. That's the only way I can think to do it, to show the video. But this is a video that's I like. I show it all the time. Some of you, if you're in this field, might have shown it on YouTube. If you get excited, you want to show it to a group on YouTube. There's a clean version, and there's a version you might want to show. So make sure if you go on there and you want to find it, view it before you show it. But it does say clean version. If it doesn't say that, you'll hear more of a raunchy kind of version of the same thing. I saw that. So now here we go. I didn't lose it. I'm just looking for the share button, that's all. I got something that's covering.
I can see.
You can already see it?
Yeah, it's already up.
Okay. So I can start playing it.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was trying to help. I don't know if I was. The play is on the left.
Yes, I got it on pause. I just want to make sure I don't lose it. And what they're talking about, in case you missed some of it when I backspaced it, is that they're saying, that they want to talk about consent. So that's what this is on.
If you're still struggling with consent, just imagine instead of initiating sex, you're making them a cup of tea. You say, "Hey, would you like a cup of tea?" And they go, "Oh my God, I would love a cup of tea, thank you." Then you know they want a cup of tea. If you say, hey, would you like a cup of tea? And they're like, I'm not really sure. Then you could make them a cup of tea or not, but be aware they might not drink it. And if they don't drink it, then, and this is the important part, don't make them drink it. Just because you made it doesn't mean you are entitled to watch them drink it. And if they say no thank you, then don't make them tea. At all. Just don't make them tea. Don't make them drink tea. Don't get annoyed at them for not wanting tea. They just don't want tea, okay? They might say, yes, please, that's kind of you. And then when the tea arrives, they actually don't want the tea at all. Sure, that's kind of annoying as you've gone to all the effort of making the tea, but they remain under no obligation to drink the tea. They did want tea, now they don't. Some people change their mind in the time that it takes to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk. And it's okay for people to change their mind. And you are still not entitled to watch them drink it. And if they're unconscious, don't make them tea. Unconscious people don't want tea. And they can't answer the question, do you want tea? Because they're unconscious. Okay, maybe they were conscious when you asked them if they wanted tea. And they said yes. But in the time it took you to boil the kettle, brew the tea, and add the milk, they are now unconscious. You should just put the tea down. Make sure the unconscious person is safe. And this is the important part again. Don't make them drink the tea. They said yes then, sure, but unconscious people don't want tea. If someone said yes to tea, started drinking it, and then passed out before they'd finished it, don't keep on pouring it down their throat. Take the tea away. Make sure they're safe, because unconscious people don't want tea. Trust me on this. If someone said yes to tea around your house last Saturday, that doesn't mean they want you to make them tea all the time. They don't want you to come around to their place unexpectedly and make them tea and force them to drink it going, but you wanted tea last week. Or to wake up to find you pouring tea down their throat going, but you wanted tea last night. If you can understand how completely ludicrous it is to force people to have tea when they don't want tea, and you're able to understand when people don't want tea, then how hard is it to understand it when it comes to sex? Whether it's tea or sex, consent is everything. And on that note, I'm going to go make myself a cup of tea.
I love this. I love it. I love it because it's just so simple. You know, we have, is that, oh, I couldn't turn it off. Oh, Jesus. Now I got commercials going. Okay, get back here. Did it stop when it's on?
I can't hear anything on our end. Just,
Yeah, you can't hear it?
no, I can't hear anything.
Okay, I'm gonna find it. Okay, so it's gone for me. Okay, I'm good. I'm coming out. Well, maybe I'll stay in and just have you talk. So I'm gonna put the slide back up. Are you seeing it?
Yeah, I can see the slide.
Okay. So what do you think about the consent with the T? Of course, it doesn't rate, it doesn't work if it's a violent sexual assault. But a lot of times in teen dating relationships, or in just relationships, you go out with someone and you met them online or you met them anywhere, and when there's a tape I had that had "she owed me," that says things like that, that you got me this way. There's something wrong with you taking a shower. When you hear no, and but this is it went too far. And so consent for me helps you to understand that in a really basic way. What are your thoughts?
I like the video, the analogy of if they don't want it, don't give it to them. You don't force it on them. And when I saw that video, it kind of made me think of there's this series or these episodes on YouTube that are called Fatal Attraction,
Mhm.
and they're real life events where women or men have gotten killed by their girlfriends or boyfriends or husbands and wives, and it is very sad. I'm like, why couldn't you just leave them alone if they didn't want to be with you anymore? They killed them.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And
that
one of
kind
the
of
things,
brought
yeah,
that to mind.
yeah. One of the things that I think about in those situations, especially as we talk about power and control, I believe that part of it culturally in some cultures is the person really does not want you to leave. And so the power and control tactics, even till death, is important. And I think I forgot to mention this when they talked about barriers to leaving, because that's important to know, and it really stresses my point. We had all of those barriers listed to read: danger, fear, societal pressure, religious values, family discouragement, economics, nowhere to go, children, emotional investment, and isolation. But what's the one thing that's not there? And many things can be there, but can you name one thing when you talk about barriers to leaving that probably should be on this list?
Fear?
Fear, I think fear is there.
Oh, okay. I thought of something on the video though, that I don't want to interrupt you, but
Go ahead.
the whole thing on the wanting a cup of tea assumes that the person could say no.
It assumes that the person is saying
Is
no.
able. Well, it assumes that they're able to say no.
You mean in terms of the kind of rape that can happen when saying no doesn't work, like in the Bible?
I'm not sure what you mean by in the Bible, but I know there are
Well,
times
the rape
a
of
person
the
is
rapes
not
in
able to say no because of either the powers involved or the fact that they have been emotionally set up to not be able to say no.
Well, yes, that can happen. I'm not sure that's what the video is doing. That's not what the video is assuming that person can say yes and no and mean it. There are times when you can't do that. But this video is just giving a basic understanding of what it means to say no and what it means to say yes. And that if you're not in any position to say either, make it a no. That's where that's going. Now, you brought up for me, but it's not something that maybe you were talking about, that there are times psychologically where you're not able to do that. But that's not what this particular is. Just trying to give you a sense of what consent is, because many people have, as we talked about earlier, talked about it in terms of how you're dressing, how you went that far and then you want to stop them, that kind of conversation we're talking about, and not as violent as what happens in psychological distress or terrorism, where you're colluding with your own batterer. That's a little heavier for the conversation. I hope that helps. Okay, no more conversations, I hear it. But the last thing on the barriers to leaving is because they love them. And sometimes we don't think about that. They love them. They don't want to leave. And that's the same thing with the batterer. He loves her, or he depends on her, or whatever it is, and so I have to employ some tactics. Some tactics that if you really do want to leave of abusive relationship, it can cost you your life. And that's the point I wanted to get to with that one of the most dangerous times of leaving, and I failed to say that, was when you make a decision to go and you go. It can cost you your life. And so instead of us saying to a person, why do you stay? We need to be asking two questions. Number one, victim, where did you get the even strength to walk out of there? And then we need to be asking, why is that person allowed to batter them? But it's not, why doesn't she leave? What other crime do you know when the burglar came and burglarized the house and shot who was in it, does anybody say, why didn't you leave the house before they got in there? But we find ways to blame victims in terms of them having control of their actions. So this is what this day has been about, with consent and the basic knowledge. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about trauma, and then we're going to go into religion. I'm going to do that faster. So when we finish that, as we go into religion, you can make your comments. So trauma, there's a whole lot of trauma material out there. It's a dime a dozen, you'll find it. This is the one I use the most. The definition is a natural stress response from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening. That's important to keep in mind because they can feel threatened. They can feel like harm is going to happen, and they can react to it. And as we know from our high school courses in science and psychology and college and all of that, that we will go through the fight, flight, or freeze, kind of response in those moments. And so trauma happens, it happens quickly, and we react in some kind of way. And so this is just showing the water is a water with the drop in it. I love the picture, it calms me down. But it really is designed to show you that the first impact is the victim. You'll see the largest amount of waves. But as you go out, it impacts the entire family. It can impact the entire community. It can impact your church community. And so it can be far reaching in its impact. But the first dynamic impact that when we talk about trauma for today is right here in that middle when it's affecting you. And so this is just saying who can experience trauma. That's important when we're doing a lot of work in communities about community boundaries and cultures, caregivers, but no one is exempt from trauma. That's what it's trying to say. There are three common elements in trauma, regardless of how it happened. It was unexpected. The person was unprepared. There was nothing the person could do to stop it from happening. And I want to give you a quick example. I hadn't intended. I am watching my watch so that we can have discussion time. But I was teaching a class on trauma, and one of the students, how when you have these the background noise, or not background noise, but where you're talking over each other because you thought the other person stopped, and there's some kind of rhythm disruption. Well, that happened between us, and she just just outright, you will not interrupt me. You will not do so and so, and I understood that as trauma, but I also understood me as being pissed off, and so I had to breathe a little bit and think about really how am I going to respond to this. But before I could think about how I was going to respond in that moment, someone else came in the class and says, we know her, we understand, what she's going through. We're going to talk to her, and let's just say a prayer right now. And I'm grateful for that individual because I wasn't ready. I had 60s and 70s in my head, not what I know now, because I've been traumatized before, and so we don't want traumas to meet. And so silence for me at that moment was the best way that I could do it. She eventually, came back, weeks later, and we talked and she apologized and all of that. But that's how trauma acts. And sometimes we think people are acting out. It was unexpected. The person was unprepared. There was nothing the person could do to stop it from happening. So this is a picture of a trauma tree, and you'll see me refer back to this. On the left side, I don't know how much you can see or read, but it's all of those things, the left bottom and our roots. That the family, family history, abuse, discrimination, poverty, war, violence, any of those things that we have experienced in life can be a source of our trauma. This is not just talking about domestic violence, it's talking about in general. And then when you go to the top of this, the top left, you'll see the kinds of things people can experience because of trauma. And that's what they mean when they say regardless of the resources regardless of the reason, the reason why it happened, these things are the same. The actions are the same. And these are things that you can be, the victim of the person that's traumatized can experience. It's racing heartaches, headaches, anxiety, anger, substance abuse, flashback, stress, diabetes. We never think about medical conditions that can be caused by that kind of trauma. Also, as a colon cancer survivor, I'm convinced, that's been an area in my life that has bothered me quite a bit. And I was not surprised at the onset in 2008 having colon cancer. It just was no surprise. And that's not as scientific as it should be, but I believe it's right there and things to think about. And then on the bottom left of the rules, we also have all these kinds of things available to us. Counseling and good social connections and education that we could expose ourselves to, so that we now have two things going right here. Things that we experience, but also things that happen. Resiliency is possible. It's right there, in the other kind of thing that's planted in our brains when we expose ourselves or people help refer us to places where we can have better mindsets about what's going on, so that we don't have to go there as much, because we're beginning a process of understanding and knowing. And so, and then the top is just all of this that we just got through saying. There's hope beyond hurt. There's growth. There's fulfillment. One of the songs I love from African American artist is it talks about, I'm stronger, I'm better. I'm wiser, much better. And so that's possible to happen in our lives, and we should never give up hope that a person can't recover, even if they recover differently. There is hope. You can heal from the hurt, and you can be okay in the place where you find yourself in the healing process. And so potential lifelong impact of trauma, all I really want to say about that right now is that it can impact every part of your life, every single part of your life. Marriage, children. I mean, it's just no place where it can go untouched because of that person is feeling trauma. That's the basics of that. Let me see if I can bring this down. Oh, I know what it says. Does somebody read that first one? I think I know what it says, but I want to hear the whole thing, and I can't see it.
Trauma should be viewed as an injury that requires support and time to heal.
And that's important, because even when we talk about mental illness and depression, we think people can sometimes just come right out of the place. We want them to be, be healed, be free. You don't have this anymore. But it should be seen as an injury. It's not an injury we necessarily liking when we see it, the trauma acted out on us.
I'm going by as I was doing my
Look at your
Oh, somebody's
calendar and tell us it's 1:30 next 8.
Okay.
Is somebody trying to say something? Okay. I just wanted to show you, to tell you that it has an impact on the brain, but I wanted to show you more of what happens in that. This is things, if you want the slide, you can look at. But I wanted to show you this because it's a picture of the brain. And when you talk about trauma, your whole frontal lobe that's in the front of your head is where all of your intelligent thinking comes from. And in your back of your head is where trauma lives and causes us to act out, in that back part. But more importantly, I wanted to point out the amygdala. And this is where all of these memories are stored, in this area. And so that's what's, and that's when we act out and we experience trauma and we start acting out. And the goal is to get us somewhere up here so that we think better. I think that's the basis of what I want to say on that slide, so we can move on. And we have to learn how to do trauma-informed care. And that's what's important to this last piece that I'm going to do. Probably need about 10 minutes to go through it, and then we can discuss it. But trauma-informed care is just a way in which, the simple way of putting trauma-informed care, we can make it sound really sophisticated if we wanted to, but the basics of that is understand these things, what we talked about and what we'll talk about, more understand that these things are part of our pastoral care, and knowing that these things exist, and then provide pastoral care that provides the necessary care to help people to help themselves within that intersectionality. Courts and the criminal justice system as a whole, hunger, those things that were on that tree. All of these things are what they call intersectionality, and they're there to impact us also. COVID was a good example of that, when they brought out, that people in many communities that were oppressed didn't have money for doctors, didn't have access to go get COVID shots. And so we have to be aware of those intersections so that we can do something about those in various ways where we can, to understand that that's informing their behavior also. Same thing that I'm going to keep emphasizing that, like I will resiliency. And here we are again, just revisiting what we did before, talking about what happens here. Now you see again poverty, fleeing the country, terrorism, all these things, economics, homelessness, all of those things are intersectionality also that we have experienced not only recently, but in our even genetic memory. And that impacts trauma also. So we're never talking about one thing. We're on the subject of intimate partner violence, but that can fit. Intimate partner violence, all of these things can fit into it to make it worse. Trauma informed is understanding this, so that we can think about some of the resources we need to offer, and maybe things, acts of justice we can do in our own congregations. And so the faithful response, we're going to go through this. We can either be a roadblock or a resource for battered women survivors, but it's our job to minimize the roadblocks. That means whatever we're doing, that's causing people not to heal and to re-traumatize them, we need to stop it. Minimize that and maximize the way you can provide resources in your own church and through referral to help the victim survivor and the perpetrator in the midst of what's going on in your church, because both may be part of your own community. And so in that we have tradition, what we've learned. I call it, things that we've learned that we just talk about individually. We have our tradition that we've been exposed to, our own personal experience, what we've been exposed to. Sacred text. People say, what's a sacred text? So we edit the Bible so that people know that we're talking about it, but other people have sacred texts also that's not the Bible. And so I think the sacred text was meant to make that even more general. Our sermons and our prayers, our pastoral care, these are all our sources of religious beliefs, and they are not just what we're doing now. I belong to a wonderfully liberated church, but I was impacted by tradition. I was impacted by security experience. I was impacted by sermons I heard. I was impacted through Bible study, and that stuff stayed with me. And most of that were places where victims found the guilt, the shame, the blame, the lack of self-worth, and all of that can come with it when people have told you that for years and years and years. That even something as simple as you're a woman, so you shouldn't be a preacher, or you shouldn't be a pastor, or you shouldn't do these things because you are a woman. And then they use the Bible to prove that. And so that's what people are experiencing also in the midst of that. There's spiritual crises that happens when you're not heard. Why did God let this happen to me? Is it, should I have ended my marriage? Because I've heard a lot of preaching that this was my fault. So obviously God is punishing me. Obviously that if the marriage ended, it's my fault, because the Bible said, that God doesn't like divorce. But people fail to realize that same scripture in Malachi maybe, that God hates violence too. Dr. Frank Thomas, a professor at Christian Theological Seminary, always says, and it's not his anymore, I just say it now because so many people have repeated it, to what end and to what purpose do we privilege certain scriptures over the other? A little power and control may be going on in our church that's worthy of self-reflection, introspective kind of work. Harmful belief, I must be a bad person. Again, that can come from our religious institutions, and I deserved it. I made my bed, and now I have to live with it. Because I told you, that something was wrong. My great aunt, my mother's sister, looked at my police husband, and she said something wrong with that boy. And he was just sitting there smiling, and so there's things in us where we say, oh God, I should have known this. I deserve this because of the choice I made. And that can throw you into a spiritual crisis where you'll see people in the back of your church, but they won't come to the front. They may be dealing with that. And so, it's good to approach them not to say what's wrong, but just maybe to say, if you're going through something, I'll be happy to talk to you. Having the domestic violence cards in the bathroom, open it up, because they're thinking a lot about this stuff. And maybe they're not ready to talk about it yet, but it's a signal for you to think, not to say, oh, you trying to be saved, or you want to be saved, let me bring you to the front of the church, because as we think they're crying because of their guilt, when they're actually crying because, they're going through some things. And we don't want to, we like to look at it as join the church, receive the Holy Ghost, and everything will be okay kind of mentality. So we need to provide theological, these are quotes, but we need to provide what I call theological clarity. We need to rethink how we preach, how we teach, how we use the Bible, how we study the Bible. Those things have to be happened so that we can find resources in the Bible that's going to help people to heal and not to be wounded. Whereas in the Methodist tradition and the Hippocratic Oath talks about do no harm. We really want to stop that. Of course, we have to hold accountability, but when we're talking to survivors, we have to minimize the harm that we will cause to them and re-traumatize survivor victims, and uplift perpetrators. And so the quote that we may not all be guilty, but we are responsible. One of my favorite quotes. These are just a list of things. We can begin to do other than getting theological clarity. We remembering to talk about resilience. Show me some ways that that you've made it through these kinds of things before. Are some of the things we can think about. And worship is pastoral care, and think about worship that you could organize in October, especially when it's Domestic Violence Month. The centers around care. Think about the arts and think about meditation. I have a scripture on here that's Philippians 4:8. A lot of churches don't want to deal with meditation because that's not of God. And that's one scripture that says, think on these things, whatever is right, whatever is of good report. That's meditation. Think on these things. And so taking that quiet space out, story listening, storytelling is important. Listen to the story of the survivor, when you're doing care, because it tells you a whole lot about them. And also the Do a Work project is good to think about, as you're reading through this, because maybe parts of acts of justice, maybe just meaning asking in the justice area, what do you think our church can do right now that would help you feel somewhat resolved around some justice issues? And they may tell you some things they can do. You may think of some things you can do and run it past them. Small things, not giant things, but just saying, I want to work within in this intersectionality thing that I know now, and that I know it's not just one thing. Where can we do that? Creating a safe space, you can create a safe space, but you have to intentionally do that. You can't just say your church is a safe space. That has to be intentionally done. And then finally, prayer. It's okay to pray with people, but don't pray with them for forgiveness from sins that they haven't committed. Talk about what it is that you're going to pray with them about. Talk about what you're thinking. And if you all are agreeing on this, or if you know that it's not a prayer that's going to blame or shame her, or him, or, just don't just pray automatically. Think about, ask people, what do you want me to pray for you for? And then discuss that, so that we make sure that when you are praying, you are in the right spectrum of the type of prayer you need to offer. What we need to do is trauma-informed caregivers, realize the widespread of trauma, recognize the things we talked about, respond, ensuring safety, which is number one always, stability, and remembrance, mourning, and reconnection. Seek and resist re-traumatization that we talked about, and then respond. And how do you respond? Integrating knowledge of trauma into policies, procedures, and practices. We have to be busy inside the church as well as outside the church. That's our call. What does God require of us? To do justice, love kindness, walk humbly. in the sight of God. And so that's the scripture that I was talking about. Being empathetic, listening is really important when we talk about how we do this. And that is listening to a person's story based on their description of their story, not for your description of the story. And it's doing listening and not talking so that you can hear what a person is going through. It's really important. Equality will, we want to switch from the power and control to equality, trust and support, mutual respect, economic partnership, honesty and accountability. All those things on the equality wheel, and you can find these online. They have some you can actually download if you Google the right thing and it pops up. There are some you can download yourself and have them as a PDF file. Lots of wheels. And then don't forget resiliency, safety. Focus on their strength. Develop healing connections on what you're doing when you're providing trauma-informed care within your faith community. We must do our part, as in terms of moral agency. We're not all guilty, but we are all responsible. And so I had this year, and I won't read it, but let me just. I was going to have us read it collectively, but I'm going to read it quickly and do the course later. There's a woman who is silent as the blows begin to fall. There's a child who is screaming as he's thrown against the wall. And it's someone who you know, although we cannot know them all, and their voices are all around us if we only hear them call. There's a memory she's hidden, yet it poisons each embrace. There's a shame so overpowering, he cannot show his face. And they're told it never happened. They are kept within their place. This crime, this wrong cannot belong within our human race. There's a truth in telling the unspeakable we knew. There's a tenderness that reaches out to pull another through. But another generation will be lost if we ignore the ones in need, and if we help, we'll get back so much more. There are none so blind among us than those who will not see. Our voices must be loud for those who cry out silently. When some of us are still enslaved, then none of us are free. The world has come from God. The word has come from God, and it is calling me and you. And we're called to make justice, called to make it right, called to do the holy work of turning back the night, called to look into each shattered, shaken soul, called to make their world and our world whole. And that's just a shameless picture of my book that I just published. The link is on there if you want to get it. I think it probably contains everything that we talked about today in terms of a memoir, in terms of my experience, as a survivor with a police officer and being a police officer. It talks about the church, it talks about the criminal justice institution, and it offers suggestions. And so trauma-informed care. So I think it's a really good book. We write the book that we wanted to read a long time ago. This is one of them, and I certainly recommend it to you. But there are also others that are on the sheet. This is not a reading list, it's suggested reading so that you can understand all different sides of the things we need to know. And I'll stop here. And I am ready if there's any questions or anything on the, or any comments or, just anything you want to say. Dr. Dixon, you're going to use the chat, and anybody that's not on the chat that still want to say something is there. Okay.
I'll keep an eye on the chat.
Okay.
I just want to say thank you for this lesson and all of this insight that you provided. I just recently found out that a classmate of mine, her father had been beating her mother for years. We were in high school together. That's been over 30 years ago. And I always thought she was acting, I don't know, kind of weird. She was very quiet. And she actually wrote a book about everything she went through. And it just goes to show we never know who's going through this type of violence. So thank you.
Thank you.
We had a question come up in the chat. Reverend Greg Hill asks, what do you say to somebody who says violence is a thing of the past?
Good question. Are you referring, Reverend Hill, to a person that is saying that violence is no longer happening to her, or violence doesn't exist at all? I'm not quite sure what context the question is.
He says the first.
Yeah, and people will do that, and I think we should, if they're talking to us and we're doing pastoral care with them, I would just, question it as a wonderful thing. That's really great that violence is a thing of the past for you. But we have to be curious as caregivers without being nosy. And that's a good, it's a kind of a difficult to navigate. But sometimes when we're doing care, Kleinbell and pastoral care talks about, let me hear some more, tell me some more, but sometimes when we're dealing with survivors, we have to be a little more pointed in our conversations, because we may not get to see them anymore. Are you safe? Say some more things about, what are you doing for safety? It's wonderful that the violence is no longer happening. Tell me some more about that. I'd like to hear part of the story about how that ended. And so that we can pick up things in what they say that will give us we have something we call a lithology that nurses have in the hospitals, assessment, whereas we're asking questions, we can actually measure with this the kind of danger they're in. We can't tell them to leave, but we can certainly say, I really think you're in danger from what you're telling me. Do you have a safety plan? I'm glad that you're doing okay, but I'm hearing a lot of things that's suggesting to me that maybe you're not. And so as so think about just having your stuff packed in case this starts up again. But it's hard to challenge people when they say they're not doing that. One person came to me in the counseling center where I worked in Chicago, and she said she thinks she's going back because she heard a sermon by my pastor, which was also her pastor. And we were doing support groups off the church site. And she said, I heard a sermon today that said, the Adam and Eve had their share of problems. I'm going to have mine too. And because I knew that person that said that, I said, go back and ask them. Ask them about what they meant, because, and she came back the next week or however we were meeting, and everybody was curious about what did the pastor say. He said, did you hear my sermon also? That when it can't be fixed. And so everything can't be said and done in one sermon or in one session, but people take those things and hold on to them, because we encourage love in ways that we should, but then we encourage love in ways that we shouldn't. And we have to think about what we're saying that would maybe stimulate Reverend Hill, this person's conversation about, oh, it's over. One of my best girlfriends, we have this thing going that when we agree with each other, it's wrong. That is not something we should agree on. There's a problem right there. But we also do this thing together when we don't want to talk about it no more. I'm healed. I come out the Pentecostal church, so I hit my head and, just go back, because that's what they do. They push you down. I'm healed, we through. Because sometimes the people just, they're tired, they're afraid, and they want you to think highly of them. And everything that he or she says may be true, but you got to investigate in ways that help you to say something to her if you think something is still going on, and leave her with resources. Don't give it to her where her mate can find it. Just give her resources, give her a number, give her something that she can use, not lay around the house. They can help her to get help if she needs it.
I had a question and a comment. I had a question about the language victim survivor. Is it that people who, well, if you could explain to me the difference between them and which is the preferred usage.
I'm sorry, say that again.
The language that you've been using is victim/survivor.
Yes.
So I'm curious about the distinction between the two of them. Is one the preferred language? Why are those used? Why are both of them used?
Thank you. When I use them, I'm talking about immediacy and maybe longer term.
Okay.
That's it.
So the victim is the immediacy and the survivor is longer term.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
yeah,
go ahead. You said you wanted
thank you, thank you. So this is just sort of a comment. I've been journeying with someone who is both a victim and a survivor of domestic violence. And it's been like two things that really stood out to me about the situation are that the abuser is a director of a nonprofit, and a lot of the people who are abusers are the last people we would ever think are. They're teachers, ministers, you know, they present in such a wonderful way. But what I also learned about the situation, I recently came to Florida from Kentucky, is Florida is one of those states where if a woman is afraid and wants to leave and calls the police automatically take the children away from both parents. And, you know, you were talking before about people always get into this argument. We talk about women and they immediately go into, well, men are abused and all this other stuff, but it really is, you know, usually women. And many women are afraid to leave because the children will be taken away from them while this long investigation takes place, which is abuse heaped onto like abuse. And there have to be ways that we can challenge these laws. And I don't even know where to go with that, but that's, you know, one area that really needs to be examined. There are like 5 states in the country that if you are a victim of domestic violence, and Florida is one of them, you are literally doomed. It is almost impossible to get custody of your children or 50-50 custody, and you risk having your children literally removed the moment you call the police and say, my husband is beating me, or my lover is beating me, or whatever. So that's just like a comment and a frustration, and something that I see as such an injustice.
You're absolutely correct. You know, and not only should we do the advocacy in those areas because they're doable. You know, one of the organizers that organized training people that I've done training with always say pick projects that you can first find wins for. And so it might be a little bit of something in that changing policy that you can start with, maybe in the church, a letter writing campaign, you know, something that you can, you know, that you're not tackling that's so large that you're not going to be successful in, but you can start a process within your church. In a prophetic preaching book, it talks about preach the sermon, do the project. Preach the sermon, do the project. You know, rather than calling your church, who may not be a prophetic church and may not want to hear all that and all of that stuff that, you know, that ain't of God, but, you know, teaching them how to, let's do a project around this, you know, because it's a good thing to do. And learning how to talk to our congressman in a different way. Those of us who know what we want to say have to calm down a bit sometimes, you know, and so that people can hear you, so that people can buy into the help. So it always depends on your church, but yes, I taught a group of police officers in Chicago. That was fun, but they picked me because they figured I wasn't scared of them. You know, but one of the things we talked about in that class, I forgot the name of it, you know, we're peculiar people. They say God's people are peculiar people. You know, police are peculiar people too. God loves us though. And so part of that, you know, was they're telling me, well, I'm a law enforcement officer. I got to obey the law. I got to obey the law. I said, yeah, on your job, you got to obey the law. You do. I says, but you can also off the job time advocate for changes within the laws if you don't like them. You're human. Just, you know, we're all human together. This is something that you don't like, work on changing it. And I think that's our responsibility.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. I also have one from the chat I could share. If there's anything pressing from the floor. Well, Jean Vandergriff asks, do you have some do's and don'ts about how to raise awareness in a congregation about domestic violence and trauma?
Well, I think the do's is looking for resources. There are programs going around now that are that are coming to churches and helping them to understand that very question of how they may offer training to clergy. I hate that word training, and police hate it too. Don't tell us nothing. So trying to find a word besides training, but really finding ways to have people come into the church and talk about the issue more, seek people who are specialists in their fields to come and talk on Sunday, maybe forego a sermon, and have a topic talked about, and then the next week you might want to do some preaching about. There are so many creative ways of things we can do to get information within our churches, and then study it ourselves. Have Bible classes with books such as the trauma, sexual and domestic violence, navigating our way through individuals, institutions, the police and in the courts, and have a Bible study, through books, so that we can touch on some of these subjects and get to really see how people are thinking and feeling, and allow space for that. Everybody don't think the same way. We all had to grow. When I joined my progressive church in Chicago, out of the Pentecostal church, and I came there, for the New Year's Eve service, and I saw women with their clothes, their robes on, with their party clothes underneath it. I can see the glitter. They waiting on church. I'm like, and I'm like, they're going to hell, they're going to hell, they're going to hell, they're going to hell. Oh, that one is really going to hell. I never thought about my sins and where I might be headed, but it was like all of these things came out, and we have to make space for that, because we don't all think of it. We have to gently, use narratives, storytelling, elderly people talking in our church about some of their experiences doing moments of our service. So many creative ways we can get this topic into the church and people into the church to help us be better at stewardship. But we need to be committed. We can't wait for the top to say it. We have to maybe do it through our women's groups, through our other groups, and our tithes and offering. Says something. I remember, I come from a family that, prosperity is a lot in their conversations. And, my own uncle, he's just recently passed away, God rest his wonderful soul. But he was in church lifting the offering, and that can take an hour in the Black church, and so he's like, well, this line, I had just had surgery for my cancer, and I sat up in the front with the family because we can do that. And so he was collecting offering. And then he said, then he had everybody line up, with the $100 and so on. So, and all I had was 20 ready to give, but it never got to me. So I pulled my sick card out, raised my hand and came back. I said, I'm leaving. I don't feel good. And I went to McDonald's and gave them my $20. They said, thank you. And so there has to be some ways in which we have to let people stop abusing us and then paying them money for it, when we can take that money to a therapist and feel much better. And so there are small ways that we can, that we have to act. Sometimes we have to fight as a church on, because these refuse to do it, and you have to mourn the other one, and move on. Those are just choices sometimes we have to make.
Well, thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Ellis Davis. I hope everyone here will join me in expressing our gratitude for all the wisdom that was showed about the multidimensional aspects of intimate partner violence, about trauma-informed approaches, the character of trauma, and also about all the ways, many of the ways that churches can engage. I'm grateful for the calls to action, for the calls to kind of patient pastoral work. So thank you so much. A recording of this will be sent out. I've already gotten some questions about this. A recording of this will be sent out to folks, so you can use this, share a recording of this in your churches. And also, I want to share in the chat that our next webinar in our webinar series this year, I'll actually be doing on food justice. That'll be on February 18th at 1:30. So there's a link there if you'd like to register for that. These are free webinars. And just to kind of also tie things together a little bit, our continuing education focus this year has been on pastoral ministry and social issues. And so we did a series of classes connected to that people took as a certificate. But also in our webinars, we've been doing complementary webinars related to those. So we had a webinar on the issue of human trafficking, had a webinar, which we also had a class on, have a webinar on domestic violence, which we've also had a class on, and now we'll be doing food justice, which we've also had a class on. So just to kind of connect all those dots. But thank you all so much for being with us, and thank you especially, Dr. Ellis Davis. This was wonderful. So grateful, and I hope you all have a blessed weekend and blessings on your ministries of healing and justice as you carry them forward.
Amen. Thank you. Take care.